Okay, welcome to a long at last edition of Weather and Climate Chat. It has been so long since we have done this. Perhaps I need to reintroduce you as to what Weather and Climate Chat is. I am campus radio guy and weather enthusiast Monsoon Mike, and you are...
I am Dr. Michael Davis of the Geography Department here at Kutztown University.
And you're our campus meteorologist. And we try to, or at least history has been in the past couple of years, to record these weekly, but obviously that turned into bi-weekly and that turned into monthly. And with us both having busy semesters, it got to the point now where we haven't really done this till perhaps the last time we sat down might have been when we were preparing for a snowstorm.
I think so.
Just to show you how long it's been.
We're coming out of the fog.
We're coming out of the fog now.
Pun intended, I guess.
So we haven't pretty much, exactly. So we pretty much haven't seen each other for a whole season. So what we normally like to do on the show, on the podcast, which averages like 15, 20 minutes, is talk a little bit about current weather and then do a recap of recent weather and then a look ahead at a topic or coming weather. Let's just recap the spring. It was kind of an interesting spring here in the Mid-Atlantic area. Kind of wet. I heard a lot of people complaining that we really didn't have much of a nice spring. Every time you'd have one or two sunny days, we had a payback with three or four rainy days. So it was a wet spring. Temperature-wise, it was a little on the cool side too. May ended up being a little warmer, but
that would make some sense too. If you've had a lot of rainfall, temperatures should be cooler due to the evaporation of all the water that's in the soil.
Right. So April leaned cool. May did lean a little warm. That's why we had a little more sun. And then we got into June, and the early part of June was a little on the cool side. But now we finally had some real, genuine summer-like heat just in the past few days. So it's been kind of an up-and-down spring, but leaning a little on the rainier, grayer side. So it wasn't the prettiest spring that we've ever had, but it wasn't the worst spring either. We have had some pretty crazy things that have happened somewhat locally and nationally as well. Most recently, just last week, a F2 tornado in Wilkes-Barre.
EF2.
EF2, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Enhanced Fuji scale.
Exactly. EF2 tornado in Wilkes-Barre, which was kind of, actually very unusual. Not totally unheard of. I think you might have seen on my page just 2 weeks ago was the 20-year anniversary of the EF3 tornado in Lyons, just down the road from here.
F3.
Right. Oh, okay.
That's before the enhanced Fuji scale.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. So this was a timing thing when they came?
2007 was the enhanced Fuji scale.
Thank you for clarifying that. I learn something new every day. See, that's why you're the meteorologist and I'm just the hobbyist. Very good.
I'm just nitpicking.
That's okay. I like when people nitpick me. So my point is it's not unheard of, but it's kind of unusual. What happened in Wilkes-Barre? You want to talk a little bit about that?
We had pretty much a storm line come through, and that was kind of somewhat rare because usually squall lines of that nature don't really produce tornadoes because the wind's all in one direction. But from time to time, you can get some twisting action, some helicity, as we call it in the meteorological business.
Right.
That took that air and pretty much started to turn it. It could be from an orographic influence because of the upper Poconos area, or it could be simply because of the squall line bowing and you create localized circulation cells, sometimes known as line echo wave patterns or loops, LEWP. And we saw the storm go through a shopping center and did some damage, mostly to the roof and the sides of buildings. And you saw some tractor trailers behind the shopping center that got moved around. That really worked out well, I would say, for diagnosing the storm because you could see a lot of the damage, and then meteorologists and engineers that came out to assess the strength of the tornado had a lot of data to draw upon, as opposed to if it went through, say, a cornfield where you're lacking that evidence.
And you'll remember that sometimes these storms are a little more, every time something like that happens, they send out investigators to look at it to judge what happened. And sometimes tornadoes are or straight line winds, I should say, are mistaken for tornadoes. Straight line wind just being like a huge burst of wind that, blows something apart, as opposed to a tornado. And you'll remember a few years ago, I think we talked about it, we were doing our show at that point, there was a minor tornado, EF1 in outside of Hamburg that destroyed that school. And there was debate amongst the meteorologists and the weather geeks in the world as if that was straight line winds or a tornado. And I think that even took some time for the investigators to judge that one, but eventually they did deem that as a tornado.
And then there was one just to the south that
Right.
the Pennsylvania Dutch started to patch up everything before the investigators came out to look at the damage.
The Pennsylvania Dutch people, Mennonites, Amish, they are very quick to correct, any damage, like sometimes too quick, because by the time they get out there, they're already like rebuilt everything, which is great. But yeah, it was hard to judge. But this thing in Wilkes-Barre, there was really not a lot of debate. I mean, they pretty much came out within hours and say, yeah, that was a tornado. And you and I had discussed it online a little bit that morning privately that, yeah, that was obviously a tornado with the way the debris was scattered and other things like that.
And you and I took the National Weather Service Skywarn seminar to give you storm spotter certification, and one of the things is they teach you how to look for straight line damage versus tornado damage.
Yeah.
And we were seeing winds pretty much coming from opposite directions. I saw some of the tractor trails behind the building that were pushed one way, but the roof was peeling back the other way.
The other way, yep.
So those are telltale signs of a tornado.
Yep, circulation. So that was obviously a tornado. So we hope that they recover well up there. Fortunately, no major injuries, no fatalities, which is fantastic for.
That's the main thing.
Which is fantastic for a storm of that magnitude. Other crazy things that have happened in the past few months, that Ellicott City flooding, which those poor people, we're now getting to the point, and I don't want to get on a climate change soapbox here, but, a couple of years ago they had a 1 in 100-year flood, and now they've had another 1 in 100-year flood.
1 in 1,000.
1,000-year, yeah. So talk a little bit about that.
You had a storm that pretty much came in sitting pretty much over Ellicott City, and it was back building, so as the storm was going with the wind, it just kept bubbling up. So it looked on radar as it wasn't moving, even though it just kept pretty much building in one area.
Is that like training?
On the backside. Not really training,
okay,
but it's more of the storm as it's moving continues to bubble up where it actually is located.
Right.
So it looks as though it's not moving, but it is.
Gotcha. Interesting.
So it kind of looks more stationary, I would say, even though it is actually in motion. Now, the upper winds during that case were quite low too, so the steering mechanism wasn't quite there. So you had a lot of rainfalls, particularly where you had a lot of moisture coming up. I believe that was associated with Tropical Storm Alberto too.
Yeah, that's right. Alberto
during
had
that
something
time
to do with that. Yep, right.
And you had that major flooding that occurred, and the other thing too is in Ellicott City, the roads are quite narrow. As compared to, say, other urban areas. So the water, as it started to rise, was moving much more quickly because you were channeling the water as opposed to it being much more open that you would see, say, in a larger city where you have this larger urban canyon, the corridor of the actual streets.
Interesting. So,
and I actually have one student next year that's going to be looking at urban flooding.
That's an interesting study. I'll be interested to follow that.
Maybe I'll bring her on air and she can talk about it.
Please. So let's talk a little bit about, we keep hearing these things when these things happen, these 1 in 1,000 year events, and it seems like these 1 in 1,000 year events are happening more like every 2 years instead of...
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago that Ellicott City got hit by another strong storm that dumped a lot of rain.
Should that raise any red flags to you, Dr. Davis, that we're having these 1 in 1,000 year events?
The U.S. climate assessment that was put out last in 2014 said that the northeastern United States is going to be seeing the most change in heavy rainfall, which includes Maryland and Pennsylvania here.
We saw a little bit of that, yeah.
About 71% increase.
Interesting.
So we're going to be seeing more rainfall potentially here in the Northeast. And I actually have one of my KU Bears that is looking at changes in flooding events in the northeastern United States and whether they've been occurring after dry conditions or after wet conditions. So are we going from wet to wet or dry to wet? So that'd be an interesting study, and that's what she's looking at over the summer. Maybe I'll bring her on too.
Okay, we've got all these potential guests. Very good.
The other thing too is I think it's more of a social issue too with how do we actually deal with these sorts of events.
Oh yeah.
Ellicott City, after the last flooding event 2 years ago, invested almost $1 million in trying to alleviate that issue, flooding from happening again, and we saw it happen again.
Right.
And I think it comes from this fact that both urban planners and scientists and hydrologists all need to get together and discuss what is a disaster and what are we facing, and come up with some sort of really solid infrastructure plan moving forward into the future. Because here in America, I feel that's lacking across the entire board, especially in urbanized areas where you have a higher concentration of people that may not necessarily be aware of their threat posed to them by these types of heavy rain events.
Yeah. And it wasn't just Maryland. Just recently, also 9 inches of rain in 3 hours in Illinois. That was just yesterday. That was just yesterday. Or the 18th. We'll go in case you're listening to this on a different day, June 18th. That's almost unfathomable. That's like 3 inches an hour.
That's right. Yeah. And because of the atmosphere becoming warmer and essentially have higher evaporation rates, it can hold more water, then you're going to be dealing with these heavy rainfall events. And just a few years ago, I published a paper with a couple students that looked at these extreme precipitation events that were occurring in Pennsylvania, and we were seeing much more infrequent rainfall, but heavier rainfall days. So what we're seeing is you're either going to have a very heavy downpour or nothing. So it's feast or famine, pretty much. And it looks more likely, particularly in south central Pennsylvania, so around the York, Harrisburg area, Lancaster, that way, is where you're really seeing the greatest change in heavy precipitation events.
And that seems to be I don't know if we're under a trend here, but that seems to be the pattern with a lot of different weather events, whether it's wintertime, summertime, it's either feast or famine with one extreme or the other. Not a whole lot of in between. Like some of my Monsoon Mike fans were just telling me, it's like, Monsoon Mike, we don't seem to have like a fall or a spring anymore around here. It's good. It's winter to summer sort of thing. So.
And then with the snowfall, we found the greatest snowfall change from heavy snow to no snow is actually north central Pennsylvania, so around Williamsport, State College, that area.
Okay, so that we discussed that. We had our first, I guess you could say, well, it really wasn't a heat wave around here because we didn't have 3 consecutive days of 90, but it was our first real taste of summer-like weather recently. And even as far north as Maine, where my friend Stormwatch Sal is vacationing, pretty toasty up there as well, too.
Yeah, you had, I'm going to say Thursday or Friday of last week, that you were starting to see some heat advisories and excessive heat warnings out for places like Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri.
At that point, it was still pretty nice here. It was still in the 80s, low humidity.
But that whole ridge of high pressure was pretty much moving our way, and that heat dome came into our area and sat over us. And then we got the excessive heat warnings and heat advisories for the East Coast, pretty much all the way from Maryland up to Maine. And when we had that warm air in place, we had the cold front come through Monday night. I don't think what day it was, just so I could put a day to it.
I know.
And we had that squall line with some severe weather that came through. And then you were mentioning that Mom talked about how you had almost like this downpour that just occurred very quickly. And that's pretty much a localized wet microburst that you would see from this storm encountering warm air. And you get that energy transfer going into the storm. So now you have colder air, and then that cold air comes crashing down to the surface, and then you get a very strong wind coming down. Can be quite strong. I think some of the winds were about 60, 65 miles per hour with some of the downbursts, and incredible heavy rain.
Actually, where I live in Schuylkill County, we didn't really have much of that. We just had a little bit of a downpour here or there, and that was it. So it seemed like the excitement yesterday or the 18th of June was kind of outside the area, like Berks County and such. But
wife and I were out for our anniversary last night.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. And there was a downpour that came by us, and it came down very quickly, and I could almost feel like the rain had extra force to it.
Interesting. Okay. So then I guess that begs the next question of, well, we can talk short term right now. For the next, we're kind of doing things in reverse this particular episode, but that's fine. The next 24 to 48 hours, looks like as we're recording this on Tuesday the 18th or 19th, at about 11 o'clock, our clouds from yesterday's cold front are decreasing. We have the sun coming out. The rest of the day should be fairly nice.
It was really interesting in the morning when you were looking pretty much east, west, or south.
It was
pretty much dark. And
I saw that.
Cloudy and overcast. But if you look toward the north, it was
blue,
clear.
I saw that. Yeah, I should have taken pictures of that this morning, but I was running a little late, so I'm like, I just tore out of there. But yeah, I saw that. It was like really dark to the south, and then to the north has blue sky. So it's like, okay, well, I guess that's coming for later. That's good.
And that makes sense because we had the cold front come through last night, so you're going to have winds shifting to a northerly direction. So the winds are coming out of the north, which tend to be more dry, and then should eat away the clouds. So
if you're listening to this today, the 19th, Tuesday, sky conditions will improve throughout the day. By later this afternoon, we should have a pretty nice sunny day. Tomorrow would be a little bit in reverse. Looks like we start off sunny, but we might cloud up. And two different models are kind of disagreeing. The GFS American model wants to keep a low-pressure system that rides along that cold front that's stalled to our south, keeps most of that rain to the south. In fact, the GFS doesn't really give us much of anything, whereas the NAM, another model that we use, kind of brings us a good dose, well, not really a good dose, but a decent dose of light to moderate rain tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow night.
Yeah, so there's some chaos between the models.
We'll see what happens, but I would say that, tomorrow is kind of in reverse of today, whereas today was cloudy in the morning and showery, and then clear in the afternoon. Tomorrow it's going to be clear in the morning, showery, unsettled in the afternoon and evening. So a little
lots going to depend on where that stationary front moves.
Depending on where that goes, though, yeah.
I think wherever that stationary front moves is ultimately what's going to decide whether we get rain or not.
So we could very well miss out on it, or we could get something. So just carry the umbrella tomorrow afternoon. That's all we'll say for the 20th of June. And then it looks like we're back to some sunshine Thursday and Friday. Weekend looks a little unsettled with our next system. And then next week we were looking ahead. Looks like generally dry weather, high pressure, and it doesn't look like too warm, or it looks like average, nothing too hot, because the high pressure is more from Canada.
With us being experiencing high pressure coming from Canada, especially if it's to our west, so like toward Lake Superior area, you're going to be getting winds out of the south. North, which makes it cooler.
Right.
As opposed to the high pressure that brought us all the heat that then moved offshore Sunday. Yeah.
That's when
and brought us the winds from the south because we were on the west side of the high, and that's when we had the temperatures in the mid-90s and all the moisture, higher dew points.
Dew points around 74, which is just about as impressive as you can get.
That's pretty sticky air right there.
But it is coming down.
Yes.
So we're noticing that. Okay, so then lastly what we want to cover here, and we are going a little long, but that's okay, is everybody's been asking, what is our official call with, obviously we've already been in meteorological summer for a few weeks already, but astronomical summer starts on Thursday. So what is our official monsoon, Mike, Dr. Davis?
Happy solstice to everybody.
Happy solstice. What is our official monsoon, Mike, Dr. Davis, summer outlook? Are we leaning warm? Are we leaning average? Are we leaning cool? What do you think, Dr. Davis?
The Climate Prediction Center is currently saying we're going to be above average in terms of temperature for the next couple of months. Although it didn't look like in the early part of summer it looked cooler.
Right.
So I'm thinking June, July, probably not that bad.
Okay.
August is probably where they're going to get us. So I'm thinking
dog days, yeah.
It's going to be brutal later on in summer, but to start with, not too bad. Probably have these swings of 90s and then followed by a strong cold front and heavy rain and then cooler temperatures. And the precipitation also looked above average too. So we could be experiencing more of a wet, warm kind of summer to start with. And if you look further out toward the Pacific, that's where we're going to start learning about a El Nino event that could be occurring. NOAA just recently put out a El Nino watch for conditions that could be coming favorable for an El Nino event.
What does that mean, Dr. Davis, for hurricane season? I know the National Hurricane Center is leaning a little on the above average side.
Yes, that one came out. When did they put that out? I think April?
Yeah, a little while ago.
I think April, May, sometime around there. And what typically happens is something known as the spring barrier, which your climate models kind of can't go past that.
Right.
So there's this inaccuracy that gets developed earlier, but then once you start getting into summer, like around June, that's when your models will start really coming into focus. It's pretty similar to trying to watch a TV show, and then you see tune in next week or something for this. And then they show you clips and like, okay, well, maybe this guy's going to be in trouble or something like that.
Right.
And you can kind of surmise what might be happening, but you don't know for certain if that's going to happen. So it's kind of similar to that. Now, with it coming more into focus, with possible El Nino, that typically means a lower amount of hurricanes toward the Caribbean and Atlantic because you're drawing moisture and energy away from the Caribbean basin and moving it toward the Eastern Pacific.
Right. Yeah, I saw that. So, yeah, it kind of conflicts a little bit because you had that one side that kind of implied that it could be a little above normal hurricane-wise, but then El Nino forecast looks like it might not be as bad. So we'll see.
And both the dynamic and statistical models appear to be suggesting that an El Nino could be developing.
Okay.
So when you have that agreement between the two, it usually has a fair amount of confidence that something could be developing.
Which for us, for hurricanes, might imply not as bad of a hurricane year, which would definitely be good after last year when there's still areas like Puerto Rico and such still recovering.
It's not to say that we could still see a monster of a storm.
You just need one to form. That's right, yeah.
But the chances of that happening appear to be decreasing as a result of this possible El Nino that develops. We'll know more later on in the summer because El Nino doesn't typically peak till around Christmas time.
Okay. Well, let's hope that it leans a little bit on the lesser side this year because, like I said, some areas like Puerto Rico are still recovering from last year.
Yes.
So they need a year off. So let's hope that works for this year. So
interesting point, too, that I'll quickly make is that there was conversation about whether Hurricane Irma should have been a Category 6 storm. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, there was discussion about that, but the Hurricane Center only goes 1 through 5, and there have recently been calls to re-examine the Saffir-Simpson scale, kind of similar to what we saw with the Enhanced Fugia scale, because of how many people might be living in that area, the speed of the storm, the risk of storm surge, a whole bunch of different factors that go into hurricanes, but none of them are being accounted for. And should they be accounted for?
Interesting. Yeah.
Especially for storms like Hurricane Harvey, which was exacerbated by all the heavy rain.
Right.
But that's still not included in the Saffir-Simpson scale rankings.
Right. Interesting. Well, I'll have to look that up because that is definitely interesting. All right. Well, Dr. Davis, we covered about 22 minutes, so I guess we'll stop there. We covered a lot of ground. Hopefully we can...
There's a lot to cover, though.
A lot to cover. Hopefully we can make an attempt not to go for a full season. I mean, if we do what we just did, I might not see you again until our next snowstorm, but let's try...
Let's not.
Let's try not to do that. So have a good summer. We'll try to touch base maybe 4th of July-ish. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
So let's not make a pipe dream and say we'll get together every week, but let's at least try to get together a couple times a month. So let's aim for around the 4th of July for our next get-together.
Sounds good.
All right. Sounds good, Dr. Davis. You have a great day.
You too.
Okay.